This is Tyler Faulkner with Carlson Software. In this video, we're going to be doing an introduction to using CAD. This is going to be the most basic introduction we can do for AutoCAD and for IntelliCAD. There's not going to be anything specific to any of the Carlson modules. We're just trying to get oriented with the program to understand the base on which Carlson works. So we have a PDF document here. This video is really just going to be following down through this document. Most of the steps are very detailed, so you could actually get by just fine without the video. But of course, it always helps to actually see the quick by quick rather than just following along with the text. So let's start off. So what is CAD? CAD is an acronym for Computer Aided Design, or sometimes people refer to it as Computer Aided Drafting. So it's really a catch-all phrase. It's not referring to one specific program. However, a lot of times people do use this to refer to AutoCAD, which is a major product used by a variety of different industries. The CAD is a computer program that's going to allow us to draw and analyze objects in three-dimensional space. As mentioned, it's used for quite a variety of different industries, for civil engineering, for surveying, for mine planning, construction, just all across the board. We're going to be discussing two main types of CAD. These are the two in which Carlson runs on top of. The first one is not quite as well known. It's called IntelliCAD. This is a close partner of Carlson Software. There's only one type available for each version of Carlson. By that, I mean there's only one IntelliCAD product. The latest version is 8.3, and that's included with Carlson 2018. Just ships with the product, no extra cost. The other one, with which most people are going to be familiar with, is called AutoCAD. This is owned by Autodesk, which is the company, and there are many types of AutoCAD products available. For example, there's AutoCAD Map 3D, there's AutoCAD's Civil 3D, there's AutoCAD LT, which is kind of a light version of AutoCAD, and I don't have it listed here, but then there is just the generic AutoCAD. There's a new version released every year. AutoCAD is, in general, more powerful than IntelliCAD. IntelliCAD is kind of an AutoCAD lookalike. This version, however, is not free with Carlson. You do have to have a separate AutoCAD license, and this is the one I'm going to be showing in today's video. The two platforms are very similar. Most of the commands have the exact same name. They have very similar looking icons. All the commands are found under the same pull-down menus. Just two different platforms on which we're going to work. Before we get into more detail on that, let's just figure out, where does Carlson Software come into play? Well, Carlson actually has quite a few different types of products. So we do data collection hardware and software, we do machine control products, but we also offer an AutoCAD / an IntelliCAD plugin. These plugins are really just added tools to help you get specific tasks done. We have 14, I believe, different modules here for the different topics that you would be working on. So these include surveying topics, civil topics, hydrology. These are just extra tools that you can add into CAD to make it more useful for what you're going to be doing. So I have a 30,000 foot view of what the program is, some of the things we can do with it. Let's actually jump into it. So I'm back on my desktop here. I just have two icons shown. You'll probably usually see the AutoCAD icon itself, which will just boot up AutoCAD. It won't have any of the Carlson menus in it. You may also be seeing a few different Carlson icons for the different modules. This is one for the mining module. There's another icon for the civil module, just looks like a roadway. Actually, any of the Carlson modules that you double click on, it's just going to control which module is pulled up first. It doesn't matter if you open up the mining or the civil module. Everything we're going to be doing, you could actually do with the AutoCAD. But I'm just going to double click here and open up Carlson Mining 2018. See the program come in. There are actually certain versions in which, actually for a lot of educational licenses, you'll actually need to run AutoCAD once. So you may get a pop-up as soon as this starts up that says, please run AutoCAD first. If you get that, just close the program, run AutoCAD itself, close it out, and then you can reopen Carlson. So I've opened this up. I've already got a few toolbars turned on. I've got a lot of settings configured the way that I want to see them. In the tutorial, however, one of the first things that you are going to see is the startup wizard. I've turned this off. This is something that just basically sets up a new drawing for you, helps you get some of these initial settings created. However, it is important to be able to change these settings after you initially create the drawing. So most of the time I just close this thing, or I'll just turn on the skip startup wizard next time, and it just takes me to a brand new blank drawing. Let's talk about a little bit of what we're seeing here. So we've got all these different parts of the user interface. Up across the very top here, we have the pull-down menus. So I've got the File pull-down menu, usual basic things you'd expect to see: open up a new project, open an existing one, save your current project, things like that. And all these different pull-down menus are pretty self-explanatory. Edit, you're going to be editing objects. View, these are going to be tools for viewing objects. So pretty much every command that we're going to need to use is going to be available somewhere in the pull-down menus. I'll talk about a couple other ways that we can actually activate commands, however. Another area which I don't have shown at the moment, let me go ahead and open this thing up, is our ribbon. Ribbons are actually very common across different types of programs. For example, Microsoft Word has its own ribbon. That's something you're probably used to using. In the same way, AutoCAD has a ribbon for the most commonly used commands. For example, I'm looking at my geology ribbon here. These are some of the most common commands. So you're not going to see every single command in the Carlson Geology module here, but this is just more so for quick access. The ribbon itself actually has different tabs, and people will often confuse the pull-down menus from the ribbon tabs. So you see the tabs here just in this general area. Personal preference of mine, I'm actually not a fan of using the ribbon. I like to stick with toolbars or with pull-down menus. If you want to get rid of the ribbon, we're going to do our very first command here. Down near the bottom of the window, this is called our command line. And this is another way that we can activate commands aside from using the pull-down menu. So we can actually just type things in here. We can tell it to do a save, we can tell it to open. One of the first commands I want you to do, if this is shown to you, we're going to type in the words ribbon close. That's a simple command name. Type it in, there's no spaces there. Whenever I press enter, notice that that closes my ribbon. Now if you already had the ribbon closed and I try running that again, say ribbon close, nothing happens. That's already there. It's not going to break anything. It's perfectly fine. And just the inverse of that, if you do want to use the ribbon, just type in the word ribbon. Press enter, pops up, and right there it is for you. So we'll go ahead and close that out just so we don't have any issues confusing pull-down menus from the ribbon itself. Now the next portion of the interface we want to look at here are the drawing tabs. So you can see I've got a start menu here and I've got drawing 1. I can actually hit the plus button here to open up a new drawing. Things like that. That's just a drawing is, if you were using Microsoft Word and you had different Word documents, a drawing file is synonymous to a Word document. This is just where everything's going to go. It's the main file that we're going to be saving and working with. So we can see multiple tabs here. We don't have anything in the drawing just yet, but I can quickly jump between the different projects in that way. Immediately below that, we have our toolbar area, and you've probably already got some toolbars displayed. Some of them probably look a lot different than what I have. You will develop your own preferences for which toolbars you want to be able to use. Really just more commands that you start to use, you'll say, well, I'm using that command all the time. You may want to turn on the toolbar for it. Ways that we can turn on toolbars is to simply right-click in the area, and we're going to get a pop-up menu here for all the different groups of toolbars. For example, there's the AutoCAD group of toolbars. And I can scroll down here, click on the little down arrow, and you can see there's quite a few of these. I do have some that already have a check next to them. That means they are currently displayed. So for example, my Properties toolbar is shown right here. And these toolbars, you can move them wherever you want. If you will grab on the left-hand side of them, move them around, and these will dock to the screen so they kind of snap into place. But if you need to turn on a toolbar, you can just right-click in the area, pick the one you want, and go find it. The main one I want you to be aware of is this Carlson Menus toolbar, which is this first one shown right here. And this is the toolbar that really lets us jump between the different Carlson modules. For example, if I will click on the first icon here, which is going to be my survey icon, you'll notice that some of my pull-down menus are going to change. Everything between File and Points is going to remain the same. Everything after that is going to change. So for example, if I switch into the Civil module, you notice everything after Points change. Now I can see 3D data, surface, SiteNet, and so forth. Jump into the Hydrology module. See Watershed, Structure, Network, all hydrology related commands. So it's just one of the main toolbars we can work with. Below the toolbar in this area, this is our drawing area. This is where we can add lines, we can add text, we can add circles, all sorts of things, and we're going to get into that here in just a minute. Below the drawing area, again, we have our we have our command line, which we already talked a little bit about. And the command line is dockable, so we can move this thing around. We can pull them down to the very bottom here. It will preview the size that it's going to be. You can readjust the size. From time to time, you may accidentally close the command line. And actually, when we try to do it here, we get a pop-up saying, you sure you want to do this? If you do want to display the command line again, you can just press Control 9. So just for sake of seeing it, I'm going to close that out. Now I can't see my command line, but if I hit Control 9, it comes right back to me. I could have also typed in a command name. Notice that I've got a command that just popped up at me. This shows me the last command that I ran. So if I were to close this out, and I were to type in _ command line, even though you can't see anything, press enter, it does the exact same thing. So there's quite a few ways to run these different types of commands. Over here on the left, we have a few of our tool palettes. I'm not going to talk as much on these right now. We'll get to those here in just a minute. But those are referred to as tool palettes. Down across the bottom here, we have what is referred to as the status bar. We've got a lot of icons here. We've got some dynamic feedback. Whenever I move my cursor around, you notice that these XYZ coordinates update. And the status bar is just telling me what is currently active. We'll talk some more on that here in a minute. But essentially, if something is highlighted in blue, that setting is active. Right now, I'm hovering over my object snap. It means my object snaps are active. If I go all the way over to the far right, I'll see 3 horizontal lines. You can see there it's popping up, says customization. If I click on that, this is telling me a menu of everything that I can actually display in the status bar. For example, I've got my dynamic input option, which is this icon right here. It looks like a plus sign with a little tag on it. If I close dynamic input, notice as I'm clicking on that, that little icon is just appearing and disappearing. Now this doesn't actually activate the dynamic input setting. It just controls if I can see the switch for it. If I actually wanted to turn dynamic input on and off, I have to actually click on the icon. So there's a lot of things that we can customize there. I will mention at this point, there are a lot of settings, a lot of tools in AutoCAD. We'll try to keep the intro here as simple as possible so we don't overwhelm you, but there's thousands and thousands of settings and tools that we can use. If you ever have a question, this is not going to be an all-inclusive introduction. You can actually get a really long way just by Googling your question. If you want to use a command to do a certain task, Google it. You'll usually get a pretty quick response. So that covers most of the interface here. Again, I'm just following along with the document, talking about some of the things we have in here. Well, let's kind of jump into some of the things we can do with CAD. So we're going to start off with drafting a very simple triangle. Drafting, that's just a synonym for drawing something. The first way that we're going to draw this, we're going to freehand it. We're not going to get as exact with this. We're going to start off with step 1, however. We are going to do the draw pull-down menu, and we're going to activate the line command. Alternatively, you can just type L into the command line. I'll show both ways here. So I'm going to go to the draw pull-down menu. I'm going to say line. We actually have an option if you want to do a 2D or a 3D line. I'm going to start off with a 2D line. And you'll actually get a pop-up menu here. I'm just going to accept the current options and say OK. And now I have the line command is active. I've got a prompt down here that's letting me, I could change the options for how I draw this. But by default, it's telling me just start picking some points. So I'm just going to start clicking around wherever I want, and I'm drawing my line in there. Whenever I'm done, I can press enter or I can press escape, and there's my line. Now the alternative way to do this, if I type in just L, this is actually a slightly different command. Notice that this was my line command. The one that I did before was my 2D line. Both producing the same thing. It's just two different commands, a couple of different options available here. But it's the same deal. Just start clicking around, and I'm drawing my line. Press center, and I'm done. Now, I do want to erase this so we can get a little more exact with drawing some of our lines. Here, I'm just freehanding it. I have no idea what size those lines are. I don't know if those lines are 10-foot segments or 20-foot segments or 1,000-foot segments. So I'm going to actually erase what I have on here. And the way I'm going to do it is by selecting what is in front of me. And actually, selecting is can be a little tricky in CAD. One way to do it, if I just pick on a line, notice right there, it just highlights that one segment in blue. Now you may be used to picking on something. If I pick over here, you may be used to deselecting what I had before. In AutoCAD, anytime I pick, it's constantly adding to the selection. So I don't have to hold down the control key to select multiple. The program knows I'm continually building up what's called my selection set. If I hit the escape key, it clears out my selection. I'm just back to it. Now if I click close to something but I don't quite get it, you'll notice you're going to have a little window appear on your cursor. If you drag it to the left, it's going to be green. If I go to the right, it's going to be blue. These are two different types of selection. If I click again, notice that the window disappears. I didn't select anything because I didn't have anything inside that window. I want to talk quickly about the two different ways that we can select things. For example, if I just click right here once, and I pull to the right. Now, at the moment, I'm not holding down the left mouse. I'm just moving the mouse around. So I can actually take my finger off the mouse at the moment. But if I drag over here and I click again, notice that everything that was fully inside of that window was actually selected. Do that again. Notice how I've got two segments here that are not going to be totally inside. If I click, it's only things that are completely inside of the window. On the other hand, if I click here and I come over on the left, I've got the green window, and I click, now everything that touches that is going to be selected. So the blue window is called a window selection, while the green window is called a crossing selection. Something else you can do, if you actually click and you hold down the mouse button, you can actually start drawing this kind of lasso effect. This is actually only in more recent versions of AutoCAD, so you may not have this functionality depending on your version. But I can do the same thing. I can just use either one of those to select all my entities, and then I can just hit the delete key and away they go. Alternatively, I can do a selection. I can do a right click and I come down here to erase. This gets rid of things there. So that's just some very basic drafting tools. Now if we want to draw things a little more precisely, which oftentimes we do, we can use what are called absolute coordinates. AutoCAD runs on what's called a Cartesian plane. We all might remember from middle school algebra learning how to work with coordinates, x and y, and even z values. And that's the way that AutoCAD works. AutoCAD is a flat world. We refer to everything in rectangular grids. And we can tell the program what XY coordinates we want to use to draw objects. So we're going to start by following along here. All we're going to do is just draw this triangle at the coordinates from the origin to 10, 0 to 10, 5, and then we're going to close this thing up. So I'm actually going to dock my tutorial here over on the side. So a little bit. Yep. And we'll dock AutoCAD to the left here. So I'm told to use draw pull down menu. We're going to do line, 2D line, accept my options here. Next, I'm going to type 0, 0 into the command line. So instead of picking something, I'm going to tell exactly where I want this first point to go. So I'm going to type in 0, 0, and this always goes in the order of x, y. So that gets me to my origin. And next, I'm going to type in 10, 0. I press enter. I didn't see anything pop, or nothing was drawn on here. So I'm not looking in the right place. I'm going to talk more about that here in just a second, how we're going to adjust our zoom. But I'm going to finish drawing this triangle first. Next, I'm going to type in 10, 5. Press enter. And still, well, I see a little bit of my triangle there. And then lastly, I'm going to type in my original coordinates. I'm going to type in 0, 0. Press enter. And I'm going to press enter once more to end the command. Now I only see this little portion here, so now it's going to be useful to talk a little bit about zooming and panning. If I hold down the mouse wheel and move around, that's going to let me pan around. If I scroll in or out with the mouse wheel, it's going to control my zoom. So I can just move this thing around, and the zoom is always going to go to the middle of my cursor. So if I've got my cursor over here and I'm zooming in, I'm not zooming in on the triangle. Something else I can do, if I will double click on the mouse wheel, it will zoom to the extents of everything in the drawing. Alternatively, I can just type in ZE. That's short for zoom extents. Does the exact same thing. And so you can see here we have our triangle. Nothing too exciting, but we've drawn our first object in CAD. So just some basics there. So we're going to keep moving along here. Let's say we want to draw a simple rectangle, but maybe we don't know the exact relative coordinates that we're wanting to use here. For example, I may want to start it up here. I want this rectangle to be exactly 7 units wide by 4 foot tall, or 4 units tall, but I don't want to type in exact coordinates. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to activate a new command. We're going to do draw pull down, and we're going to use the rectangle command. And for the first point here, let's say I'm starting somewhere off in space. Notice I can still zoom and pan around while I'm waiting to activate the command. I'm going to pick somewhere right about here. And now if I want this to be exactly 7 units wide and 4 units tall, well, I need to have a way to do that. So we're going to use what are called relative coordinates. And down at the command line, instead of typing in 7, 4, which would draw it at the exact coordinate 7, 4, it actually dropped it in right there. I'm actually going to type in just one extra symbol. I'm going to say at 7, 4. The at means it's going to be a relative coordinate, so just relative to my currently selected point. I'm going to press enter, and there's my rectangle. Excuse me. So exactly 7 units wide, 4 units tall. I do have some dimensions shown on here. I'm not going to get into that just yet, but we know that those are the exact sizes of this rectangle. Another way that we can enter in coordinates is not necessarily with XY coordinates, but we can also use polar coordinates. As an example, let's say we want to draw a line 4 units long to be drawn from the bottom left corner of the triangle at a 13-degree angle from the horizontal direction. Okay, so let's just show this. It gets a little bit wordy here. We're going to repeat the line command. Again, we can do either the pull down menus, toolbars, or we can type it into the command line. I'm just going to type in L. Center, pick my first point, and for the first one I am going to go exactly at the origin, so type in 0, 0, gets my first point set. I'm going to just move my cursor around and I can see where the next point's going to go. But if I want this line to be exactly 4 units long at a 13-degree angle from the horizontal direction, well, I don't know right off the top of my head what the absolute coordinate is. I don't know what the relative coordinate is in X and Y, but I do know what it is with polar coordinates. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to type in, this is still going to be a relative coordinate. So I'm going to start off with the @ symbol. I'm going to type in the length of the line that I want to use. And then I'm going to type in the less than symbol, just kind of a little angle symbol. And then I'm going to type in an angle measured from the horizontal. Press enter. And you can see my line popped in exactly at a 13-degree angle, and it's exactly 4 units long. At this point, let's talk a little bit about checking our properties. So to check a property of any entity on the screen, I'm just going to pick on it. So I'm going to click on just the line that we drew. If I pick multiple entities, it's going to be a little more challenging to check the properties because I'm going to have 2 things I'm inspecting at the same time. Again, if you need to clear your selection set, just hit the escape key a few times, and then we can pick on it. So if I want to check the properties, I'm just going to do a right click, and I can see a bunch of options on this pop-up menu, and right there I can see properties. Click on that, and I'm going to get my properties tool palette pop out from the side. Now the tool palettes, they can be docked. When you first see this, it may actually be floating off in space here. I always like to kind of bring this over to the side. Just drop it right in there and it locks into place. Let me full screen this for a moment. So there's my properties tool palette. One other thing that I really like to do is to turn on this auto hide option. If I click on that, notice that the tool palette shrinks down when I'm not using it. If I just move my mouse over here, it shrinks down. Anytime I hover over it, there's my properties. I don't have to pick something and do a right click every single time. I just pick it, hover over properties, and here's everything I want to know about it. So the properties that I'm interested in, first of all, I want to double check the length, which I can see right there. This is exactly 4 units long. And the angle, I'm currently displaying my angles with bearings. So I'm 77 degrees east of north, or the inverse of that would be 13 degrees north of east. So that's exactly what I typed in there. There are some things that I can change. I can change the color of this. I can change what layer it's on. I'll talk some more about that here in just a minute. But that's just a quick way that we can inspect some of the properties that we've been using, or that we've been typing in here. Excuse me. So we've talked a little bit about absolute, relative, and polar coordinates. Let's talk a little bit now about using object snaps. Let's say I wanted to draw things in here, but I didn't want to actually type in any coordinates. I just want a line to go from some feature to another feature. So our prompt here is, let's say we want to draw a line connecting the top right corner of this rectangle to the top of the triangle just using object snaps. So I want to draw a line from this corner to this corner, but I don't want to type in any coordinates. First of all, I have no idea what this coordinate even is. The way we're going to do this is by turning on our snaps. Now we are down here in the status bar. You should by default be able to see the object snap icon. It's just a small square with a little dot in it. Now if you can't see this icon, you will need to come over here to bottom right to customization. And we're going to look here for 2D object snap. I want to make sure I've got a check mark there. And that lets me see my snap settings. Now the snap settings are not going to be enabled unless I click on it. Make sure that's blue. But we need to go one step further here. If I click the little down arrow next to the icon, I can see all the snaps that are shown to me. Currently, I just have the perpendicular snap enabled. I'm going to want to turn on the endpoint snap. There's quite a few different things that we can snap to. For example, we can snap to midpoints of line segments, snap to the center of circles or of closed polylines, things like that. Right now, I just want this endpoint snap on. So with that enabled, I'm going to activate my line command. I'm just going to type L into the command line. Now I'm going to click on the top right corner of the rectangle. And notice whenever I get close to it, I get this green little symbol. If I'm over here off in space, I don't have any of these snaps active. As soon as I get close to an endpoint, get my green snap, I click, and now I know that that line is exactly on that corner. Now I can come down here to the top of the triangle. I see my green endpoint snap turn on. Click again. Now I can press Enter or Escape to end the command. So now I can see I can zoom in as far as I want, and I will never see a gap appear there. Zoom in just as tiny as I can. Now, if I had tried to draw on this freehand, and just show this as an example, I'm going to turn the snap off. You know, I can get close, and if I'm zoomed out, it's going to be not bad. But once I start zooming in, I'm going to see those gaps. Those gaps can actually create a problem for some commands. So to be safe, I want to make sure that I snap appropriately. And again, there's quite a few other snaps we can use in here. Let's talk about moving things around. So if I want to move the rectangle or the line segments, anything like that, we can use what are called object grips. So if I click on my line segment here, notice I've got these 3 little squares that show up. Each one of those squares is called a grip. If I were to pick on one of these grips, just click right on it, that what's kind of grabs a hold of it, and then I can move where I want and click again. That moves that grip and the associated entity. So I can move things around. And notice when I'm moving grips, I still have access to my snaps. So I can snap right to here on that endpoint, know exactly where it's going. If I grab the midpoint, that's going to actually grab that whole segment and move the entity as a whole. So you can play around with that a little bit. All right. So just a couple of ways we can play around with that. Following on the tutorial, we'll move it from the top right to the bottom right of the rectangle. All right. One other thing, if I want to deselect something, just mentioning it here, if I get a few things selected, let's say I want to deselect that rectangle, but I want to keep this line selected. If I hold down the Shift key, click on the rectangle again, it'll remove that entity from the selection set. Very similar to pressing Escape. But again, there's a lot of fancy things we can do with selection inside of AutoCAD. So, pretty simple stuff there. The next thing let's talk about, we're going to be using layers. AutoCAD will let you draw as many things in it as you want. You can draw very complex drawings. For example, if you're drawing a site plan, you might see contour lines. You might see lines that represent utilities of some sort, for power, for water, whatever. You may see building lines. You'll end up with a lot of things kind of overlapping each other. And if you're taking a look at the drawing for the first time, it can get really busy. So we need to be able to isolate the view to only see what's important to us at that particular time. We are going to take a look at the Layer Property Manager. Now at the moment, everything's been drawn on the same layer by default. I'm going to come down to the command line. I'm going to type in Layer. And this is going to open up another tool palette. It's kind of large, so I'm going to full screen again. This is our Layer Properties Manager. And this is another one I do like to dock to the side. So you can see my properties there shown. There's my Layer Properties Manager. This one I also want to do an auto hide on. Now when I hover over this, you can see quite a bit here. So we can resize pretty much everything we want here. I've got quite a few columns shown. The first column that I have shown here are all the different layer names. Well, actually it's the status, but the second column is the layer names. We can actually reorganize these, which I usually like to keep them in the default. We're always going to have a layer called 0, which is kind of our default layer. We can't delete that layer. AutoCAD has to have it to operate. Now in mine, I've already got another layer called plotting. Yours you may not. You may have a few others shown in there. In the example here, there might be some in here called disk-text, existing, final. That's really just going to depend on the template that you use. You can delete layers that aren't in use. We can add as many of these things as we want. By default, everything is going to go on the default, or excuse me, everything is going to go on the 0 layer. Whichever layer is currently set current, as shown by the green check mark, that's what layer we're going to be drawing things on. So for example, all the lines that I've drawn so far, if I pick on them, maybe all of them, and I look at the properties, I can see the current layer. They're going on the plotting layer. In your case, they may have been going on 0. If we want to move those objects to a different layer, there's quite a few ways we can do it. The simplest way is just to select them, check out the properties. I can see the layer listed. If I click the down arrow here, it's going to show me all the current layers. So I can click 0. Now they're on the 0 layer. Nothing too exciting. We're not really seeing anything change on that just yet. But let's talk about how we can create some new layers. And it's going to be very important that we use descriptive names so that we know what's on that layer. If I gave you a drawing with a bunch of crossing lines and said, here it is, you'd have no idea what those lines represent. We want to put them on layer names that help us understand what we're working with. I'm back in the Layer Properties Manager, and I can see a few icons up here near the top. The first one in the top left, if I hover over it, it's a new layer. If I click on that, it's just going to add a new row in here. The default name is going to be Layer 1. Let's we're going to use a descriptive name here. We're going to call this Circles. Nothing too fancy about it. Back in the tutorial, we're going to change a couple of properties of that Circles layer. Let me actually dock this back over so we can keep an eye on our tutorial. So I can see my Circles layer here. One of the first things we notice is the color. It's going to be white by default. If I double click here, I'm going to get this color palette pop up. Now I can pick a new color for this layer. I'm going to make this layer green. Say OK. And something else I can change is the line type. If I double click on this line type, I'll see a few of them already suggested to me, and actually I'm seeing some that you will not see. There are a bunch of different line types we can pick from. If you don't see one here listed that you like, you can just click load. And here are a bunch more we can pick from. So I'm going to scroll down here. I'm going to look for that dashed layer. There it is. I'll say OK. I'll pick dashed. Say OK again. And now that Circles layer is dashed. All right, the last thing that I want to do here is set my Circles layer to be current. So I'm just going to double click on the status icon there. Now anything I draw is going to go in that Circles layer. So let's try doing this now. We're going to use a different command. I'm going to go to Draw Pull Down. I see Circle. And I'm told to pick the center point of the circle. And there's a couple other options I can use there, but I'm just going to go ahead and pick. I'm going to draw a big one to start off with. And you notice here I've got that dashed line type. Yours may be appearing slightly differently based on the scale of the line. If I draw a small one, it's going to be mostly continuous here. I'm just going to draw a couple on there. Repeat that. Draw another circle. And the reason that you're seeing this is due to the line type scale. If I pick on both of these, I take a look at the properties, notice my line type scale is set to 1. Basically, if I increase the value, it's going to increase the size of the dashes. If I decrease that value, maybe to a 0.5, notice I'm going to get a few more dashes shown up there. Maybe I go to a 0.1. And there I see quite a few more dashes appearing. So you can mess around with those as needed. I'm not going to get too in-depth with that. Draw as many of those as you like. But we're going to keep on moving down. We're about halfway through this. So we've got circles drawn on the Circles layer. Let's say we have a lot of these. If I don't want to see those, I can just simply turn the layer off. I'm going to go to the Layer Properties Manager. Now one thing about this, I can't turn the layer off if it is set to be my current layer. What I'm going to do is let's change our 0 layer back to be current. And let me actually full screen this. Move this over to the side here. Put my layers. I've got 2 icons here that will allow me to turn off that Circles layer. One is just the on-off column. Looks like a light bulb. If I click on the light bulb, notice my circles are appearing and disappearing. Just to the right of that is the freeze icon. And notice this has the exact same effect. Now, in order to see the circles, both of these have to be on. If either one is turned off, I can't see circles there. The main difference there, this is actually going back to when AutoCAD was in its early days. There was a significant difference between turning the layer on and off and freezing it. If you turn a layer off with the light bulb, you can't see it, but AutoCAD still has to process it. If you freeze the layer, you can't see it, and AutoCAD doesn't have to process it. Now, with modern computers, there's really no difference in the amount of time it takes to turn it on and off versus freezing it. So as a rule of thumb, I always tell people, just mess with freezing it. Always leave them turned on, but freeze the layers. If you don't want to see it, why should AutoCAD have to process it? So now that we know how to turn layers on and off, create them, things like that, it's good to be able to put objects on different layers than what they currently are. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and put our triangle here. I'm just going to put them on a different layer, just as an example. Deviating from the tutorial just a little bit here. We'll just call that layer 1. Make that layer red. Change that back to a continuous line type. Okay. So I'm going to pick the points on my triangle. 3 points there. There's 2 ways that we can change the layer for this object. The simplest way, I believe, is to use the properties pull down. I'll grab that and put him on layer 1. Just very simple there. Now, another way to do that is to use one of our toolbars. We haven't really used any of the toolbars just yet, but we're going to get a little taste of that now. Let's make sure that your properties toolbar is shown. So if we right click in this area, look at AutoCAD, we can see a properties toolbar. And the toolbar is the one that looks like this. You got 4 fields, 3 of them should say by layer by default here. So I'm going to put him back up here. And that's going to show me the properties of whatever I have selected. Very similar to just looking at the properties tool palette here, but there it's just always displayed to you. So if I grab onto one segment of this triangle, notice that it tells me it is colored by layer, which is showing up a little preview of red there. It's got a continuous line type, and the thickness of the line is set to by the layer as well. Now, I want to point out that we can change these properties to match whatever the layer property is. For example, layer 1 is colored red. However, just because an object is on layer 1 doesn't mean it has to be red. If I wanted to pick this segment of the line and color him to be yellow, for example, he's still on layer 1, but he has his own color. He's totally independent of the layer. So if I were to come into the layer property manager and I were to change the color of layer 1, make it blue, notice that 2 segments change because they're tied to the layer property, whereas the 1 segment that's I set manually, he doesn't change with the layer itself. So those are just a couple of ways that we can change properties of the layers. Let's see, scrolling down a little bit more here. Talking a little bit about the non-layer specific properties. And we can make as many of these as we want. The tutorial will have you actually go through and make a few more of these. And that's actually one of the last things I'm going to be showing in this video. Everything else in the tutorial is really kind of talking about paper space versus model space, which I've got a separate video on plotting for that. That's not going to follow along with the tutorial as closely. So you can choose whichever tutorial you want to follow from there. I guess one other thing I should show in here before we wrap up this quick intro, just some other common commands and things that we'd want to know. Down at the bottom of the tutorial here, I have some commonly used toolbars. These are just some of my favorites, not ones that you would have to use. Of course, you can get used to these and just pick the toolbars that you want to see and customize your interface as needed. Let's talk about some of the other drafting tools. We've already been using a line, we've drawn circles and rectangles. One of the most commonly used drafting tools that we actually haven't used yet is a polyline. If I go to the Draw pull-down menu, notice I've got a 2D polyline and a 3D polyline. If I do a 2D polyline, I'm going to accept my default options here. Say OK. And I just start drawing a few segments here. The primary difference between a polyline and a line. Notice if I pick on my triangle here, which was drawn using the line command, each segment of the triangle is its own individual piece. Whereas the polyline, it is one continuous object. By default, I would strongly encourage you to use polylines whenever you can. It just makes selection of things easier, and actually some commands actually require you to use polylines. So those really are preferred. So there's a few other types there. Let's talk about a hatch and a text entity very quickly. First of all, a piece of text. If I go to draw, pull down, text, there are quite a few text commands. The simplest one is just the standard text where you're going to pick a point. You can specify a height. I'm going to try 5, which means this text will be 5 units tall. And the rotation angle, notice I can pick a point to set the rotation. If I just go with the default, which is E, I mean it's going to be aligned to the east. It's just going to be from left to right across the screen. Type in my text, press enter a couple times, and there it is. I can double click on that text to edit it. Whatever I want to do there. The other common drafting tool we use is called a hatch. And to do this, I'm going to draw another 2D polyline. And instead of just pressing enter to finish this thing off, notice I have a few options shown down here. If I hit close, it closes that polyline up, and it's like a watertight seal, if you will. There's absolutely no space between any of these segments. With that, I can hatch this in. I'm going to go to draw, looking for hatch, do a standard hatch. Quite a few options to play with here, but the main thing I need to set are my boundaries. I can either select an object or I can pick an internal point. Let's try selecting objects. I'm going to pick that polyline, press enter. And now I can pick the pattern that I want to use. So there's quite a few of them here. You might find it helpful to click the button there. You can see all the different pattern types to pick from. Most of the time you can just use a solid fill, and that'll work for a lot of applications. Pick your color. Maybe I want this to be a magenta fill. Say OK. And it just fills that in magenta. I can also change the hatch pattern, pick on it, and we'll go over here to the properties. Notice that I've got a different pattern name, just solid. Yeah, scroll down, I can find something else. Let's go with this angled pattern. And there we can see it's got that kind of rectangular pattern shown in there. So you can pick as many of those as you like. Just some common commands. And again, we're not going to get too detailed with these. This is just a brief overview of some of the things you can do with CAD. Let's see, some of the things we may want to see here. Just general commands, not so much drawing entity types, but general commands. So for example, the move, rotate, and scale commands. Let's say we wanted to move the circle. We already showed how to do grip edits to move polylines. Some of those grips will actually move things. So move him around. But if I want to do a standard move, I'm going to go to edit, pull down. I'm going to do the move command. There I can pick on as many objects as I like. Pick on a few of those highlighted, and I'll press enter. And now I'm told to select a base point here. So I can pick anywhere that I like. That's just kind of like where I'm grabbing those entities. And I can move them around. I can just pick a new point, or I can use relative coordinates here. For example, if I want to change the y coordinate of all those entities by 10, I could type in at 0, 10. Press enter, and all those objects get moved up 10 units. Pretty simple in there. Another common command, we got the rotate command. I'm going to do edit. Look down here for rotate. I'm just going to do a standard rotate. Here, I'll pick my rectangle. I'll pick a base point. Just be somewhere in the center there. And notice I can just pick a new rotation. I could type in a new value. So for example, if I wanted to rotate this 30 degrees, There we go. Rotates them right in. The scaling command, next. Edit pull down, scale, do a standard scale. I'll pick a circle here, for example. Pick a base point, maybe from somewhere out here. And I tell the program what scale factor I want to use. If I want this circle to be half its original size, type in 0.5, or I could just type in 0.5. Scales in. I'm going to repeat the command and do just the inverse of that. And actually, if you want to repeat the last used command, you can just press enter. That's the last command you used. I can scale a couple of objects at a time. So maybe I want to scale that circle and that piece of text. There's my base point. I want those to be twice as large. There you go. A few other commands, copy, cut, paste. You can actually just use the normal Windows hotkeys. So if I wanted to pick this piece of text, I could press Control-C to copy it. And then I could press Control-V to paste another one in. Control-X would, of course, cut. Control-V, paste it back in. So that's just using the normal Windows hotkeys. I also have specific CAD commands for that. Let's get back in there. So I could go to Edit Pull Down menu, and you can see we've got copy. And do a standard copy. So there I can pick my text, press enter, pick a base point. I can just put him wherever I want. Pretty simple there. See some of these other commands. Of course, we have the undo and redo, so you can do Control-Z to undo. Let's see. Keep going down through here. One that I do want to point out is the regen command. So this resets the drawing, basically kind of redraws everything on screen. If I were to zoom way in on an object here, I would eventually reach a point where it's not going to allow me to zoom in any further. Or if I were to zoom out far enough, it would do the same thing. It wouldn't let me zoom out any further. If you ever have anything on the screen that's just not looking like it's displaying properly, you can type in this regen command, and that regenerates the program. It'll actually do this from time to time on its own, just to kind of refresh the screen. Just a few other commands there. I'm not going to get into the rest of these right now. Again, this is just kind of a brief overview. The rest of this you can look through on your own, get an idea of how some things work there. The last thing I am going to do, however, is we're going to save our drawing. I'm just going to go to File, Pull Down. I'll do a Save As, and I can save this wherever I want. Let's put it on the desktop here. Let's call this Example. And there, our drawing has been saved. The program will automatically save the drawing every 15 minutes by default. So if you lose something, the program crashes, it'll have an automatically backed up version, and it'll actually prompt you if you want to open that the next time you open the program. So that's going to be it for this brief tutorial on CAD. Again, this is not by any means an all-inclusive tutorial. You can take full days of training on AutoCAD, and we're condensing this down into about 40 minutes or so. So this is a very quick and dirty overview. Again, if you have any questions using CAD, you can ask, just ask Google, type in whatever you want to know, get your response back.